back as best I can. We don't have much time left. I mean, you're all here for a reason. None of y'all getting paid. I'm not getting paid either. We all know this is for our children and for our grandchildren. And we know, too, that if we don't fight back, they have nothing left. You know, our forefathers had some place to go to. We don't. We got to fight for this nation because there's nothing left to go back to. And the way I feel is look, if I get on the battlefield and I've done my 100% best, and when I face God someday, He can say, well done, I'm fine. I've done all I can do. And I think we're all in the same boat. So with that, I really appreciate y'all having me here. I did leave time for questions. And then we'll get back to fun old Orangeburg with the ice storm and everything else. So thank you. The website is billconnorsc.com, which is on the cards. Yes, sir.
Hey, Bill, thank you so much for your service and your courage. And I know that you were our mutual friend for quite some time. Sure. But I talked to one of the Lindsey Graham people here in beautiful Charleston, and most people know this person, who said, we're going to crush them like June bugs. Mm-hmm. We've got $7 million.
Sure.
They've got 200 or 350,000 or whatever it is. And we're going to Benghazi them to death. Meaning he's going to pretend, he's going to talk about Benghazi.
Sure.
It was tough on Obama and Hillary Clinton. He called them to task while these other people were sitting around doing nothing. That's their deal.
Sure.
What's your question?
The question is, how do you countermand that?
Sure. Well, two things I say is, number one is, if this wasn't a runoff state, I think there would be it'd be a much tougher job. I think there are 4 good candidates. I guess there's some others that have possibly gotten in. But the bottom line is that I believe, based on numbers right now, and the poll numbers we've done internally show him below 50% right now. Okay? I mean, ours actually heading down closer to 40%. So here's the whole point is that I think he's going to be forced into runoff. Once he's forced into runoff, he can talk about Benghazi all he wants. He can't get around Sotomayor and Kagan. I'd ask you to go take a look, by the way, at the video I've got, because that thing got 75,000 views in the first few days out there. Mysteriously, it was taken off YouTube. Wonder who did that. That was reported as abusive. But here's the thing. MSNBC was talking about it. And there's also this issue with his early record and his closeness to Hillary Clinton, people letting it. There's a lot of things that are going to come out. Now, I would say that the money does matter. How you spend the money, how you save your money, where the money goes. And again, I learned this through experience and running statewide. The money is critical. But what I did find too is that you can have an oversaturation. Once you reach a certain level, with 4.5 million people in the state, only about maybe 500,000 primary voters, he can get 10 million, he can get 20 million. It doesn't overcome certain things. And the activists know the deal about his record. He's got his record to deal with. So I think he'll be forced to run off. So I think, a bigger question right now is first of all, supporting the person to run off. I already said, it's not me. I'll support that person, get behind them, and I'll use all the things I've got to help out in that way. But I do think you need to ask yourself the question, if he's forced into runoff, he will have to debate. Right now, and Lindsey, by the way, if you're looking on video, man up and debate us. And I mean that. I've already said it over and over again, but we've asked him to have debate after debate. And so I'll use the term man up, come, debate us. Because one thing these people are doing is they're trying to say that we're distorting his record. Please, tell us where you're distorting your record. Stand up here. Let us know. I'd love to hear it. But, a part of it will be, and I've heard the same rhetoric, and that's great. Get overconfident. Think that you've got the whole thing in the bag. We'll work our tails off with the grassroots, number one. And number two is there is a lot of outside emphasis on this race. And, some people hold them back. That's fine. But if there's a runoff, which I think there will be, whoever gets into it will get a deluge of money, resourcing, everything else. And Lindsey's got his record to stand behind. So I think that's the Benghazi can't overdo it. Yes, sir.
Bill, thanks for your time. I'm conflicted sometimes about what's the role of the federal government as far as life issues, protecting life.
Good question. Great question. Okay, because being a constitutionalist and also being a born-again Christian, I've got to be careful to be consistent. Okay, I mean there's common grace, and frankly, we do lead all the people, and that is right, and that is a Christian theme, by the way. So, for example, when it comes to marriage, and we'll start with that one. Marriage is something where we should protect it by protecting the state's sovereignty. So, for example, in Utah, and I talked about this first, is a judge that comes in to try to make a hokey argument about the 14th Amendment, preventing Utah from claiming that marriage is what everyone's claim has been for 200-something years, that judge should be impeached. Okay, that's how you protect their 10th Amendment rights. Now, the life issue, and this is a critical one because frankly, this goes to the core of who I am. That's when I do believe the federal government has a stake in. Here's why. The 14th Amendment guarantees everybody, and I believe born or unborn, the right to life, the right to due process, the right to equal protection. It guarantees. And when the 14th Amendment came, of course, originally it was the end of slavery, and it was to make sure that slaves were not treated as second-class citizens. That goes straight into the unborn. And so for me, the federal government can have laws to protect life. And I believe that still stays constitutional. Now, what you have sometimes is people that are constitutionalists who believe that there's no mandate and it should be a state issue. I disagree because of the 14th Amendment. So thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know how it works when you get into the Senate. Are you asked to join committees, or do you petition to be appointed to committees?
Sure.
What I really want to know
Yeah.
is what other interests do you have?
Sure. I mean, in my case, 2 or 3 different things. My life's been eclectic in the sense of 3 professions, if you will. 24 years with the military, most of that active duty, but also reserve. I've done both reserves and National Guard. So I'd love to be help with the military, but also, frankly, I'm AB rated as an attorney, which is a top peer review rating, and I'm a constitutionalist within that. So working in the committees, if I get assigned to the Judiciary Committee, believe me, we'll go through some serious training on constitutional law so that Congress understands its duties. No, by the way, its duties that for the Supreme Court, all appeals authority comes from Congress, number one, and then all courts beneath the Supreme Court are by the power of Congress. And the last thing is, frankly, I'm a small business owner, and I've been successful in it. And my wife, by the way, is an OBGYN. And we've been married now for almost 23 years. And as Cassie will tell you, she went to USC and stayed with her mother during that time frame. The point is, when you're married to someone like that and gone through it all with that, I have a lot of interest in those type issues. And I think say, okay, your wife's doing this, and maybe she should do it. The point is, I'm going to have a lot of insights when it comes to the issue of healthcare and all that. So those are some different things I'd open myself up for. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
We're coming up on the holiday, the Jewish holiday of Purim.
Yes.
The story.
Esther.
Queen Esther called the
Yes.
nation to fast and pray for 3 days.
Yes.
And it turned the world upside down in a day. How likely would you be to call for a day of prayer or fasting prayer?
Sure.
How likely, if you're elected, or even before you're elected,
Yeah.
would you be to call for a day of prayer?
Right. Well, I think one thing I can do, is by my example and through my protection of religious liberties, really push the whole point that we should not be ashamed to be, Christians, people of faith, Jewish. That's quite frankly what our founders were. And George Washington, by the way, the day after the passing of the First Amendment, which gave the Establishment Clause, by the way, they called for a day of thanksgiving and prayer to God. So people that try to use the wall of separation thing really go a bit overboard. At the same time, though, I'll be in the Senate, so it'll be one that, unlike the president, who can, certain powers there, it would be a little bit different. But they will understand. I'll not be ashamed of who I am and my Christian faith. And I think, frankly, a lot of change has to happen from within. And here's what I mean by that, is that the government sets the boundaries of freedom, and then the church does its job. And when the church does its job, that's when you see real progress, reform take place. And so I want to make things so that, great pastors can go in there and really reform things, because that's where it's all going to happen. I appreciate the question. I really do. Yes, sir.
Lindsey's going to have the airwaves, but he's got $6-8 million. You're going to have a major ground game. How many booths do you have? How many do you need? How are you going to get them?
Sure. One thing that I think I do have a slight advantage on was having run for lieutenant governor only 3.5 years ago. And it was amazing because when I announced, so much of that army, if you will, came back. And we got someone coming to the Senate committee who's actually a firm grassroots person. Her name is Holly Talley. You'll see her a lot around the state. But on the airway thing, I'm not going to discount going to the airways too. I'll tell you that right now. What I believe in the money thing is, because I learned this, you got to be grassroots, but you also got to get in the airways because you got to get the story out there. One of the problems I've found is, if you're conservative, the press won't give you the time of day. And what they do is that they tell the truth, sort of, about you, but they marginalize you. So, tell one little word and so on and so forth. And, what you can do with the airways is you can get that message out there quickly to everybody. So I want to do the ground game, but I also want to make sure that we, use the airways and the money. That's why the money is important. You can't get around it. John?
Well, I worked on a few of these campaigns, and what I found, at least in this area, and I assume that you are making those contacts, the morning jocks on the radio are a very important way to communicate, because those folks are not that big for Lindsey.
Sure. Yeah. I just want from Rocky D 2 nights ago.
Yeah, but just in general.
Sure.
They'd love to get you on there. So
Appreciate it.
we know all the local ones, the local lady on 94.3.
Sure.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we're definitely, every chance we get, I've
I
got
don't know
to
about Greenville enough places, because I don't know.
Sure. I think one other thing too is beyond the in-state. I believe this too. It's a national race, and senators who are elected obviously are in the interest of South Carolina. But there's a lot of interest in changing out both John McCain and Lindsey Graham. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is I've done a lot of national broadcasts, and Lisa Benson, the Cowboy Radio, another one coming up very soon. All these different things to get the message out. To also say, look, we're going to do this as a conservative team. And I want the South Carolinians, but I also want folks from outside. You can't vote, but you can also call in, you can send money in, you can do different things to help out. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Have you been interviewed by Freedom Works or Glenn Beck?
Yeah, I was on the Blaze Network early on. Glenn Beck, was sick at the time, and we got, just like I'm sure the other candidates do, we get the feelers out nonstop within Fox News. And here's something too: is if y'all can help out this, I'm sick of seeing Lindsey Graham's mug on Fox News. So here's what I tell you is, we're all, I know me, Lee, and Nancy is trying to get ourselves back on Fox News. And look, I'm not sick and tired of them claiming that we're Beatles be squashed or dwarves. It's like, what it takes to go against something like this, and frankly, we've got a state senator, someone who ran statewide, made the runoff. We got the first female senator graduate. We got a great upstate. We got some good people out here, and Fox News needs to get on the program and get in. Now we're going to do all we can, but I'd ask you guys, regardless of who it is say we want Lindsey Graham's challengers, and because otherwise we're going to question Fox News' integrity here about Lindsey Graham. What's going on? Yes, sir.
Thank you for your service, Bill. I'm a retired veteran.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You've known me, and we've been associated since 2009.
Sure.
One of my major concerns, if I had any positive thing to say about Lindsey Graham, is what he's done for the military. And he has, okay? The whole 26 years I was in, then, so understand you have a certain amount on one side of you, but people don't know about that other than what you're going to tell them.
Sure.
Do you have any other plans to combat that facade, if you will?
Yeah. Good point. One thing I will say is we do have to recognize Lindsey Graham's strengths. And something I found out in my gov race is I spoke to a lot of VFWs, American Legions, MOA, Military Officers Association, and I saw guys who were right up until the Hun, who were Tea Party guys, who were for Lindsey. And frankly, it comes down to if they've had some issue with the VA or whatever else, he's made the effort. I'm making a lot of efforts. Half my time is with veterans groups right now. People like Becky Risher really trying to help out. General Jim Allen, big American Legion guy in Columbia. General Paul Valley. They're all trying to get me into the veterans groups and let them know, look, if you lose Lindsey, you're not going to lose the veteran support. You got a guy who grew up in it, spent his life in it. I'm going to take care of him because it's who I am. And so it is a message I want to get. And I will say too that this is where the airwaves come in. The way they marginalize sometimes is I'm not ashamed to be an Orangeburg attorney, but that's literally all the newspapers will say if they're given the one spot, even though they know, look, I'm a senior combat veteran and 24 years, all that sort of thing. And the veterans need to hear that. So I plan to do all I can to get on the airwaves, both radio and TV, and get the message out that way. But you're right. And I would say this much too. This is another lesson learned from the lieutenant governor's race is you can get what they call the echo chamber effect. And what it is all you go to is sort of Tea Party meetings and GOP meetings and nothing else. And you think you've won. You can win all the straw polls 99-1. Because frankly, in the lieutenant governor's race, that's kind of the sense I had. It's like, wow, we're killing this thing. And then all of a sudden, at the very end, you end up losing in a runoff, wherever it is. part of that is getting outside the echo chamber into other groups that are conservative, but don't necessarily always go to meetings, and they'll vote in a primary, you know, and frankly, on this end, VFWs, American Legions, MOA officers, those groups will vote. You know, Citizens for Life, the pro-life groups, which, you know, is who I am too, they're going to vote. Other Christian organizations, where you get into, you know, churches, let them know who you are. They're going to vote in primaries. Those have got to be some of the focuses, because otherwise you end up, and I've seen this, everyone's competing for the same 1,000 activists, which is great, you know what I mean? But eventually, you know, 1,000 activists generally make up their mind somewhat early on, and you've got to get out beyond that into, okay, here's who I am, and all that. And I learned the lesson again, so I appreciate you bringing that up, and I definitely appreciate your help in getting the message here as well. Yes, sir.
What safeguards would you have from the coming captives to lobbyists and some of the big donors that will be running free campaign?
Okay, I think what you're coming here is the idea of you know, safeguards and not being corrupted by the system, and then, yeah, and that's a good point. And people have asked me that, is, okay, you go to see, how do we know you're not going to become, I mean, I think a part of it is the biblical admonition that he who stands take heed lest you fall. And that is understanding that if I'm up in D.C. long enough, I probably would get, I mean, it's not because I think low of myself, but I think anybody, you hang out in the wrong place for long enough, you could end up getting infected by that place. And so, you know, in D.C., that's kind of, you spend enough time in the sewer, you're going to smell. The point being there is that I do believe the term limits are something that you've heard from me, and I'll sign on our paper, is that, you know, 2 terms, that's 12 years in the Senate. And someone goes beyond 12 years, I think Lindsey, probably 1994, he'd come from the state legislature. You know, he was generally at that time considered a pretty conservative guy and everything else. He got to Congress, maybe he started out whatever, but over enough time of being in politics and all that, it's time to go back home and be a real person living in the laws. And so that is, you know, one of the ways. Also, I think with donors is, if you look at my donors, it's very well spread out. I mean, you know, I've got something like a 600 donor base just in the 6 weeks I came in the race. Raised about $43K during the holidays, which really, it's not fun, by the way. You get it before Thanksgiving. You call people up, oh yeah, no Thanksgiving, Christmas, but, you know, give me money. But I feel proud of having, you know, done that bit. I threw in a substantial bit of my own money because I believed in putting skin in the game. But I don't want to be ever in the position where I'm beholden to any one person. So I think the best thing is just keep myself away from DC as long. That's right. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Another thing, I got my call from Lindsey staffers.
Sure.
I'm a committee man for Berkeley County, and he proceeded to tell me that we did not need to center. We didn't know what the definition was.
All center. That's right.
And so, anyway, I asked
Sure.
him about his nominees for voting for Sotomayor and Hagan. And he said that Lindsey believes in the Constitution, that they were well qualified, so he had to go and vote for them because by the Constitution, that's what he needed to do.
Yeah, and this goes in. Here's a problem in I found going to law school later in life, and just so you guys kind of know why judges are so screwed up sometimes is they start in constitutional law at Marbury versus Madison after having never read the Constitution, and John will back up this too. And I actually, in law school, had the blessing of studying with a guy named Professor Quirk, who just the most conservative constitutionalist that you'll ever meet. And we read the Federalist Papers. We started at ground. We read Montesquieu. We read, you know, took all the ideas leading up to the Constitution. What was the intent? What were the arguments? All these sorts of things. Most judges have never seen. Lindsey Graham clearly has never read the Federalist Papers. And I think clearly he never went beyond the first year law school that, you know, he thinks he learned something in, because if he believes that, he's crazy. You know, it was advice and consent of the Senate, which means he has a duty to go through. And oh, by the way, again, having practiced law, if you don't understand the Constitution, you're not qualified. That's a competency issue, in my opinion. And when Sotomayor and Kagan, I don't know what he fawned over him. I didn't understand that, particularly Judge Sotomayor. It was just like, what are you doing here? Because there are a number of issues when it comes to Second Amendment, when it comes to life, when it comes to things that, you know, they aren't just ideology. This is also issues of, you know, sort of judicial understanding. I don't think she was that good. So, you know, I appreciate what you're saying. And I do think, too, by the way, it needs to be, you know, vote of the bodies, but censure is clearly something that 7 counties have already done. And I don't mind if...
Well, you know, I have not made up my mind about how I was going to vote on that.
Sure.
But that phone call made up my mind.
That's good. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to make a comment to Barbara's
Sure.
question, really. I think the reason he voted for those two women, because we are so shallow, and there are so few voters when you consider the number of people.
Sure.
I think he simply did it for the women's vote. Because, you know, like abortion is women's health care. I mean, we have a misnomer for, you know, for everything. And I think it was just, you know, oh, well, they're two women, and if I put them on, then they will know that I will be for women's rights, whatever they are.
Sure.
So that's my comment.
Sure. I think one thing you went into too, and I believe this goes into why we need to replace people in term limits, is I think he was thinking that, well, if I do this here, they'll help me out later on down the road when I get a, you know, but that's one of those things, a guy who thinks he's going to be, by the way, he said this, is he should be there 50 years. I mean, I saw him receive an award from La Raza, which is that sort of real, quite frankly, racist, you know, group. And I saw him on YouTube video. And first of all, he jokingly said, well, my predecessor, Strom Thurmond, was here 50 years, so I guess I'll be here 50 years. He said that. And he also said that people like us who disagree with his comprehensive reform are bigots. That was the term he used on video. So, but the point there is, if you're thinking 50 years, you're probably thinking, well, I'll scratch their back here, they can scratch my back, but it doesn't work that way. Democrats don't play that way, and they frankly stand behind their ideology a lot better than folks like Lindsey Graham. And some people say, well, what if he made an agreement before this that if he did not, or if they didn't oppose nominees under Bush, we wouldn't oppose people here? At that point, it's one where, you know, maybe he even thinks about resigning at that point, rather than vote for two justices that no one in South Carolina, I believe, no conservative, is ever going to take. So I, you know, appreciate the comment on that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I got a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Something you never deal with the Senate, but there are national issues in itself.
Yeah.
What you do about nullification, like nullification of Obamacare, and also the Convention of the States?
Sure. Well, first thing I'll do is the nullification bit. I mean, I stood there on the State House grounds with, you know, three other candidates, Lee Wright and Richard Cash, and I believe, quite frankly, the Constitution is very clear. The laws must be in pursuance of the Constitution. And therefore, you know, and this is not the nullification crisis, by the way, the tariff, you know, the tariff abominations. That was a whole separate issue where the argument was only economics. This is a constitutional argument that Obamacare is not constitutional. Now, I've heard Tom Davis's objection to it, and Tom Davis's objection was that if we say this, it's like we're nullifying it for the other states and the federal government. I disagree with that. I think we can say that we're nullifying it for South Carolina. This contract was written for the states and for the federal government, and this contract says that laws must be in pursuance of the Constitution. Obamacare was sold under the Commerce Clause. And even this liberal Supreme Court said that it was not constitutional under the Commerce Clause. They sold it saying the individual mandate was not a tax. They allowed it as a tax. But since they sold it for something else, the whole thing to me is just, quite frankly, it smells bad, and every branch has a duty to read the Constitution. So I believe in what we've done. And then the Convention of States, I'll tell you this much. I'm a constitutionalist. Article 5 is in the Constitution, period. I've read the Federalist Papers on it, and here's the key argument for why they did include one of the remedies, which was allowing the states in this case versus Congress, is there may be a time that Congress would not vote for something because it was against their interest. Something I am very passionate about is term limits. I don't think Harry Reid would ever support term limits. I don't think a lot of our Republicans would ever support term limits. I don't think, you know, so there's a ton of things out there with term limits in particular where this is one of these things. And by the way, historically, what's happened is we've never had to go through it because every time they've really threatened it and come up, Congress has given in and made the change. So I'd love to see the change. The bottom line is it wouldn't be something I handle as a senator because quite frankly, it's going around me as a senator. But as a constitutionalist, I would say that, yeah, my reading is, and my Federalist Papers are, it is something that's allowed by the Constitution.
Bill, we'll
Yeah.
take one more question.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, how do you feel about the 17th Amendment? You talked about it.
Yeah. And actually, too, I want to put the 17th Amendment in with the things we talked about at Goose Creek 912 all at once, because what we did was, in this little tiny time period, 1913, a number of things happened. Number one is we instituted the income tax, which I'm a fair taxer, by the way. So I believe we should move, maybe we had to move through a flat tax to get there. But I'd like to see a point where we actually don't have the IRS anymore. And we don't have to worry about and we've done it. We did it through most of our nation's history. you get there. And the other point is the election of senators. And I mean, in this, originally when the Constitution was written, the idea of the senators was something close to a House of Lords. And you read the Federalist Papers, you know, a body that was not as tied to the passions of the people, but was from the states. And so they were actually picked by the states, the state legislatures. And then, by the way, at that same time frame, you had this sort of monstrosity called the Fed developed. If you all read the history about it, it's interesting. Those bankers got together secretly, and we'd always talked about never having a central bank. There was all kinds of arguments against it, but the Fed was developed. And you see all three of those things happen all at once. And then you see things like the Great Depression and all the problems we start seeing later on. And I think it was a terrible time. I mean, just decisions were made at that point, and we were, I love Teddy Roosevelt as a hero at San Juan, I really do. But Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive, and a lot of things he did started us down the road toward progressivism, which Woodrow Wilson took to the nth degree, and eventually led us toward Keynesianism, you know, under FDR. And so it's a sad period in history, and you know, I'm sorry to see, you know, what all happened, but particularly I know time all together is, I wish they hadn't happened. I think they've really made some bad mistakes in our nation's history, but particularly the one I want to see end right now for me is going to a fair tax, which would mean eventually abolishing the IRS.
Yeah.
So, thanks.
I know that you said you wanted to get on the road, but if you
Sure.
can stay at all, I know I saw a couple of other hands up, but this could go on for 2 hours. Because I know somebody says something and then you think of another question.
Maybe she wrote to his kids, who knows?
I appreciate the, yeah, don't tell my wife that surprise.
We already tweeted.
Very good.
So if you can stay, or if any of you do have another question, and Bill does have to leave right now, then, you know, you could
Sure.
whale him out the door and
You don't,
continue with the
I'll stand
meeting.
out there and answer your questions. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much for coming.